and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove. There is no Taylor Rockwell today. I mean, he's out there somewhere, he's just not here. Taylor actually has family in town, and so he's asked me to pilot the Total Soccer Show X-Wing all on my own for a day or so. He also left a note specifically saying not to try flying the ship with my eyes closed. He said just because it worked for that one time for that one kid doesn't mean it's going to work for me. Today's guest is Matt Doyle, soccer analyst for MLSsoccer.com. You know Matt, right? I don't really need to explain who he is or why you'd be wise to listen to his soccer analysis. You probably already read his column. Matt and I talk about Jonathan Gonzalez. We're careful not to rehash the conversations we've already had on TSS and Extra Time Radio, respectively. And Matt is not shy about expressing his frustrations, but he also offers a couple really smart ideas that American soccer could implement going forward. We also talk January camp because who is better positioned than Matt to give us the lowdown on the pros and cons of this roster. If you want to know about where guys like Christian Ramirez, Justen Glad, Brooks Lennon, Marlon Hairston, Walker Zimmerman and more fit in with this team now and might fit in with this team going forward, you should listen to this whole conversation. We also talk briefly about a US men's national team book Matt is thinking about writing and about Star Wars The Last Jedi, which Matt did not enjoy and about which I disagree with him so strongly that I couldn't even get into it on today's show. But seriously, it's a fine movie. Don't overthink it. Just go see it and enjoy it. Then don't tweet to Matt about it afterwards. Then everything's good, all right? Quick note before we get going, today's show is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people get lower rates on life insurance. To see if you qualify, get your free quote at healthiq.com/TSS. There will be a health-themed quiz in the middle of today's show. You've been warned. Final note, remember, we're also doing the live event with Howler Magazine, that George Qureshi of Howler Magazine, in Philadelphia on January 18th. That's a couple Thursdays from now. Go to FIFA.wtf/Philly2018. That link will be in the show notes to sign up for more information. But Thursday, January 18th in Philadelphia. Okay, here's my interview with Matt. So Matt Doyle, for the first time in 5 months, Skype tells me, I have you on the other end of the line. How are you doing?
It's been a long 5 months, hasn't it?
It certainly has. Has anything big happened in US soccer since we last spoke?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I've buried my head in the sand and just enjoying this winter of our discontent.
Okay, so there's obviously there's two things I want to talk to you about today. There's been some really big news about someone choosing sides. It's been kind of controversial. I've got to talk to you about your opinions about Star Wars The Last Jedi.
Oh, boy. I'm ready to start with whatever direction you want to take on this. So.
I mean, I know your time is valuable, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but I do want to say I kind of disagree with you on Star Wars The Last Jedi, but I appreciate your critiques, and I especially enjoy your wife's rewrite.
Yeah, well, thank you. She did a much better job with it than Rian Johnson did. Giving the characters...
I agree, but I actually enjoyed Rian Johnson's film. I just think your wife's story was even better.
Well, I mean, I'm going to try not to insult you here, and I'm going to say you are correct that my wife's rewrite was much better than Rian Johnson's write of The Last Jedi. Giving the characters actual decipherable motivations and giving the protagonist an actual flaw, to me, that goes a long way toward making a quality film, and I remain disappointed as a Star Wars fan that the last two in this, or the first two in this sequel trilogy, have sucked. They've sucked out loud. They've just been awful. No.
So no spoilers, but if anyone wants to find it, Rebecca Cohen, she wrote sort of a rewrite, and the final scene that she writes is really, really good. That would have got me if I was in the theatre, but I don't want to, give any spoilers for the movie or for the rewrite.
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
that's smart.
Speaking of choosing sides, there's really just an elaborate setup for a segue. Speaking of choosing sides, we're going to talk January camp, but the big news that landed that same day, yesterday, was Jonathan Gonzalez, the news that is more or less confirmed now, right? That he's going to do the one-time switch and he's going to play for Mexico. I actually just this morning, Matt, listened to Extra Time Radio and I heard your thoughts on it, and they seem to line up with the conversation that Taylor and I had yesterday, which seemed to be that that there was no conversation, no reach out to Gonzalez in November, and that's really where it started to break down after he wasn't called in. And that, like, we're not quite buying this thing of, we tried to reach out to him over the last month. It was kind of too little, too late. Does that summarize your feelings as well? Yeah,
it does. And I think there are people at U.S. Soccer who will maybe dispute certain parts of it, which is, I mean, we've all seen Rashomon. This one thing happen and you get 10 different points of view.
I don't think we've all seen Rashomon, but yeah.
Well, we all should have seen Rashomon. But I take the kid at his word when he says that nobody talked to him in particular about that November camp against Portugal. Now, he should not have been called in for that. Even though the U.S. could have forced Monterrey's hand and made them release him, he had the game against Portugal was on November 14th. The following day, there was a Copa MX semifinal against Club America, a legitimately huge game, and they needed him for it. So they were right not to force Monterrey's hand to release him, but they were absolutely wrong and inept and honestly lazy. They were lazy in not reaching out to the kid himself. But it's also, it shouldn't have just been then. Any time a Mexican-American kid starts breaking out in Liga MX, there has to be somebody at U.S. Soccer where the light goes on. You're like, oh, well, if this kid keeps playing well, he's probably going to get interest from Mexico as well as the United States. And we don't have, like, our Thomas Rongen's done a really nice job recruiting dual nationals over the years, but he's a 60-something Dutch guy who's maybe not as in touch with Dutch American, I should say. I don't want to diminish his commitment to this country and to the game. He has been a huge part of building not just this league, but the U.S. national team program. But like, have a little bit of foresight and understand, like, maybe we could take Hercules Gomez, who's a recently retired U.S. national team player, a Mexican-American dual citizen, and create a sort of liaison program. Or just call Landon. Landon speaks Spanish. Have him go up to Santa Rosa where the kid was raised and speak in Spanish with the kid's parents and be like, hey, just want to show you that U.S. Soccer is really committed to you. As soon as the kid makes his debut for Monterrey, that has to happen. And what really bothers me isn't that Jonathan Gonzalez picked Mexico over the U.S., because guess what? I think most people in this situation would pick the best national team to play for. And right now, Mexico's a better national team than the U.S. The thing that bothers me is that there is no process in place. There is no structure in place in U.S. soccer to avoid this sort of thing, to actually make it systemic, that we have a fighting chance of getting these kids. And that's a lack of oversight from Sunil on down, and as you can tell, 24 hours later, I'm still pretty damn heated about it.
I don't blame you.
Not as angry as I am about The Last Jedi, which was freaking terrible. And I am angry at you for actually liking that film. But we could put that aside for the rest of the conversation.
I mean, the Jedi should have a better scouting system, I would say. Some outreach to that kid with the broom.
Well, they should just have a structure. They should understand that one after another, all their best students keep falling to the dark side. So please, institute some sort of quality assurance, checks and balances, a freaking HR department, so they don't have someone trying to kill their student.
Circling back around to US soccer, does it seem a little bit like too much was on the shoulders of Thomas Rongen? Like it was kind of like, he's got this covered, we'll let him do it.
Yeah. It definitely does. And look, having Thomas Rongen visit the family 3 times over the course of the year is definitely not a bad thing, but it's definitely not enough.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the sort of calcified old boys club that it has been part of U.S. soccer for a long time. There are a lot of fingers to point and a lot of blame. But let's remember, though, that back in June, it was actually Bruce Arena who out-recruited Mexico and Juan Carlos Osorio for the other Jay Gonzalez.
Yes.
And then not as big a player, not as big a get as Jonathan Gonzalez was, but still very significant. So these things can be done even when there is a less than optimal structure in place. So it wasn't a fait accompli. The thing that bothers me is that that less than optimal structure sort of stayed in place. And this, honestly, it goes back to 2011. It goes back to Sunil pining after Jurgen and hiring Jurgen Klinsmann to be a disruptor. And he was left in place to disrupt things for 5.5 years. And when you disrupt enough, you have zero organization afterwards. You have zero organization.
Well, that's interesting, because I thought of Klinsmann's strength as maybe being some sort of recruitment. But I guess that's just Klinsmann himself and not the organization underneath him. Exactly that.
Look, Jurgen Klinsmann is still a bigger name than anyone who's ever been associated with U.S. soccer, and that's why he kept the job for so long, and that's why he was so successful at recruiting a lot of these dual nationals. But as Bruce Arena proved, you don't need to be Jurgen Klinsmann to successfully recruit dual nationals. It wasn't just Jesse Gonzalez. He also got Kenny Saif to file a one-time switch from Israel to the U.S., and Kenny Saif's a very good player who had, I would say, minimal contact with the U.S. before Bruce Arena. So it can be done, but there need to be safeguards every step of the way. We don't have that. We don't have that because Sunil hired Jurgen not to run an organization but to disrupt it. And that's what he did for 5 years. And it's left us scrambling for the last 18 months. And that scramble has cost us a World Cup appearance, and now it's cost us Jonathan Gonzalez, and it's cost Sunil his presidency. And you know what? That's a hell of a legacy to have.
At risk of veering into some other territory, I was recently in a conversation with someone who talked about the Democratic National Committee and how for so long they'd been focused on just getting presidents elected and had kind of forgotten about local races. And apparently there was kind of a light bulb went off there recently in terms of, we should be looking at like school board and, state rep and maybe members of Congress. Is it kind of a similar sort of setup there where we've just focused on the face at the top?
I'm gonna push back against that narrative. I think the Democratic National Committee and a lot of Democratic organizations have tried to prioritize a 50-state strategy and local races. The real problem is that people don't get interested. People aren't interested in that when they have the presidency. They just aren't. Howard Dean in 2006. Sort of quote pioneered the 50-state strategy. He was able to do that because there was an unpopular Republican president, and the Tea Party was able to do the same thing in reverse in 2010 because by that time Obama had been an unpopular Democratic president, and now we have an unpopular Republican president. And guess what? The Democrats are having success at the local and state levels. Something they haven't had since 2006. So I think that overarching picture has more to do with what we're seeing electorally than Democratic Party being lazy or too focused on the top, which is not to say they couldn't have improved, and which is not to say they're not improving. Well, what we've seen for the past 15 months or so has actually 14 months, I guess, has been really heartening in that regard. And we've digressed bigly at this point, so I'll let you steer us back on course.
Well, speaking of presidents, do you have any optimism that after the US soccer presidential election, whoever is the winner, that this sort of structure in terms of recruiting guys like Jonathan Gonzalez, Mexican American kids, but also any other kids, will be improved? Do you see the chance of a better structure being in place where it's not just Thomas Rongen and his bow tie tasked with everything?
Yeah, I do. And I think that maybe this losing Jonathan Gonzalez, and again, even if we had that structure in place, I think we probably lose Jonathan Gonzalez because, again, he's going to go to the World Cup, man. Mexico has a whole raft of good number 8s and zero good defensive midfielders. If I was Juan Carlos Osorio, I would call up and cap tie and put him in the roster immediately because he's that good and he fills a need for them. But Osorio being Osorio, he'll probably play him at left wing or something.
I actually did see a quote from Osorio about how he saw Jonathan Gonzalez as more of the sort of more forward players in a three-man midfield, which made me think, oh, Juan Carlos, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
He's going to reinvent the wheel every time. But yeah, I am encouraged by the. I mean, losing this kid is going to make people rethink these structures. Yeah. Rethink how do we communicate? Who do we send to communicate? Do we, is it just the coaches, or do we have, again, liaisons, sort of outreach things? Herculez Gomez's experience as a U.S. national team player, as an MLS player, as a Liga MX player, is vastly different than almost anybody else's.
Because he's played on both sides of the border.
He's played on both sides of the border. He's won on both sides of the border. He has dealt with a structure here that, frankly, underrates or overlooks players who come from the background that he comes from.
Yeah.
And he's more than willing. He's happy to jump in and help out and in some form or another be that guy. But again, it shouldn't just be Herc. There should be a structure in place, and I think that this incident is going to force all of the candidates to address this thing. And I guess I'm just naturally optimistic that it gets addressed. I think it'll be addressed effectively. I don't think it'll be perfect, but I'm a big fan of incremental change. I don't think it needs to be I don't think the perfect is going to be the enemy of the good here, and I do think it's going to improve.
Yeah, so you're saying, I think I agree with that. Sort of, there's no need to burn everything down, but let's just look at the things that need changing and change them. Essentially, like build on the foundation you've got, and add some very different new windows and doors. Yeah,
I mean that's an analogy I will buy.
That one's approved. Right.
Yes.
One final structural thing that I meant to ask you about. Do you think there's anything to the idea that when Jonathan Gonzalez left the United States, right, he was with the youth team. I don't know if they were development academy or if they were just I know they were a pay-to-play type team, right? And he was in that showcase, and then he went and joined Monterrey after the showcase, I think when he was 14, 15, right? And then he could see a path to their U20 team. And I know that Mexican Liga MX's U20 teams are sort of a really high standard and are really highly rated by the senior teams. And they're a proper sort of bridge to first team football, right? That's literally, not literally, but that's what happened for Jonathan Gonzalez. He played for the U20s, impressed, got promoted to the senior team. Now he's in the Monterrey senior team. And I look at when kids join MLS development academies or other development academies, you can get that homegrown player tag, but that thing of when you hit 18, there's the USL in between, which is kind of good enough, but not, and it's better than it's ever been, but it's still not quite the same as this dedicated U20 team, or in Germany, the U19 teams that are really this proving ground for the first team. And I wonder if there's maybe a structural thing that allowed Gonzalez to not exactly slip through the cracks, because, it's not as if he was unidentified, but there wasn't a pathway to the first team, or there were too many cracks in the pathway to the first team in Major League Soccer.
I actually think that's reversed. I think if you talk to guys like Eric Gomez or Nayib Tolan or any of the fellas who really do a good job. I mean, John Arnold do a good job covering Liga MX. I think the biggest criticism is that managers there are way too reluctant to promote players into the first team. Yeah,
Gonzalez is the exception, not the rule.
He is. He's very much the exception. I mean, if you looked at that final between Monterrey and Tigres, he was the only player under 25. The only, and I think
there's actually a lot of foreign players in that.
Yeah. They're only about, I think, 30% of the players were Mexican.
There's Montes, right? There's Montes, but I think he was injured for the final, possibly.
Right. Yep. So it's I think that if you want to bring it back to look, and I am loath to say let's just copy what the Europeans do, but if you want to bring it back to what Germany has done is they have those U19 teams that are huge, but they also have reserve teams who play in the third or fourth tier of German soccer.
Which would be the equivalent of USL, right? If
Exactly.
we kind of had... we have the structure of those teams playing Los Dos, etc.
Exactly. And so I think what MLS has done with a lot of the USL teams, I think that's... I think it's an unvarnished good. And you only have... just look as far as the Red Bulls, and you could see what that's done for both highly rated 15-year-olds, or when he signed Tyler Adams, getting immediate, pro-level games against guys who are literally making their livelihood off of it, and also providing sort of a second chance, second path to the top flight for guys like Aaron Long. But the Red Bulls also have all their academy teams from the U20s on down. And they just signed the kid Ben Mines, who was the star of their, I think, U17 or U18 team, and played a dozen games for their USL team last year, and he'll be a starter in USL this year as an 18-year-old, and he'll probably play 1,000, 1,500 minutes as a 19-year-old in MLS. So certain teams in MLS have done a very good job of replicating that pathway that you see, I think, primarily in the Bundesliga and in La Liga. And I think rather than the Liga MX pathway, which is fraught, it's very fraught, especially for the players, I think that sort of replicating Spain and Germany is the way to go.
So you mentioned Tyler Adams. He is in the 30-player January camp roster. We got 30 names, I think 15 uncapped players. It wasn't... I think it's not quite the sort of... the level of names aren't enough to sort of make up for fans the loss of Jonathan Gonzalez, right? It would have been nice to sort of open up this roster and see loads of big names, but that's kind of what you get when it's a majority MLS uncapped roster, and with FC Dallas refusing to participate.
Yeah, I actually think that fans seem more excited about it because it is such a young, sort of mysterious experimental roster.
Yeah.
If Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore and Clint Dempsey and Matt Beasler had all been on this, what's the point?
Yeah.
We know, we know what those guys can do, and we know what this past cycle they can't do. So it's we have years now to experiment, and that's credit to Dave for as much as Dave Sarachan screwed the pooch with the Jonathan Gonzalez thing. He's done the right thing with this roster, and I'm guys like Danny Acosta, Justen Glad, Zach Steffen. Kellen Rowe, hopefully we get to see. He's a little older, but hopefully we get to see him as a playmaker. Marky Delgado, Russell Canaus. These are all guys who have shown out at the youth levels and have started to play significant roles for their teams at the MLS level. And I'm excited to see them. And I'm more excited for this, and I think the fan base is more excited for this than they would be for just the same old U.S. national team camp.
I kind of think there's the MLS hardcore fans will be excited because they'll know these names, but I think there's sort of the sort of not as focused MLS fans who are like US soccer only, the type of people who are like, why isn't Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic in this squad? I think those guys will not be thrilled about this, but I guess there's only so much you can do in that situation, right?
Yeah. And I actually wasted about 500 words in my column yesterday explaining why Weston McKennie.
Yes. I kind of thought, he must be hearing this a lot if he's putting this at the top of the column.
I don't know. Maybe I've been circling the wrong neighborhoods in Twitter, but I think you're right, but at the same time, there's a ceiling for the amount of interest you're going to draw on this.
Yeah.
We missed the World Cup. This is the crappy January camp that we have every year against the crappy B team opponent. It doesn't. You could call in Pele and Messi. There's only going to be so much interest in this, and I think that's fine. We this can be our little secret for the hardcore nerds who care, way more than we should.
It's like January Soccer Nerd Club.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly that.
Hey, listeners, this is Daryl from the future cutting in with a quiz for you. And that quiz is because today's show is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, and vegetarians and soccer players get lower rates on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/TSS to support the show and to see if you qualify. And if you go to healthiq.com/TSS, one of the things you can do is take a quiz. There are actually several quizzes, and you can take those quizzes to prove that you have a health-conscious lifestyle and gain extra points, and that will lead to bigger discounts on your life insurance. So if Taylor was here, I would do it with him. I'm going to do it with you. Here's a quick sample. The half marathon is the most popular running race distance in the world. How many miles is a half marathon? How many miles is a half marathon? That's a running question. A couple of soccer questions as well. There's one very simple one that you should be able to answer. I think you have to answer this just to prove that you actually do play soccer. Which part of the foot is most commonly used when passing a soccer ball? This is multiple choice. Is it the heel, the outside, the upper area, or the inside? Heel, outside, upper area, inside. I'm not giving you the answers because that would be cheating. One more soccer question. Which of the following types of training is most helpful for soccer players? Is it maximal strength training, circuit training, swimming, or bench press training? Maximal strength training, circuit training, swimming, or bench press training? Other things that you can do at healthiq.com to earn lower rates on your life insurance is to sort of verify your fitness. You can do things like send your Fitbit data, like look how far I ran, and then you can get discounts. That's the whole idea of Health IQ, is that health-conscious people deserve to be rewarded with lower rates on life insurance. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/TSS, or use the promo code TSS when you talk to a Health IQ agent. That way they'll know that we sent you. healthiq.com/TSS. The link will be in the show notes. Well, let's get into the details. I saw that either in your column or on Extra Time Radio, which again I listened to this morning, you mentioned that one of the things you really liked is that the collection of centre-backs on this roster, which would be Justen Glad, who I'm excited to see, Ike Opara, Tim Parker, Walker Zimmerman, are more mobile than centre-back collections for the US in the past. And I think I know what you mean by that. I think you basically mean they're quicker. But I wanted to sort of ask you for more details about that, because I noticed that you guys kept using the word mobile, and I wasn't sure the exact definition.
Quicker, faster, more willing.
More productive?
Yeah, right. I hope that's what you enter the intro of this segment with now. But yeah, quicker, faster, more productive, more willing to step off the line and I don't want to just say make a play, but like impose their will upon the game.
That's how I see Walker Zimmerman, especially. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, he's probably the best case study in that. We haven't done a good job in the past of closing down space. Our back line.
Right.
We've been traditionally a bend don't break type of defense. These guys, Glad especially, because I think his ability to read the game, and Zimmerman because he's just an off-the-charts athlete, they will come off the line and do things that we haven't seen a ton of in the past from U.S. soccer, and I'm excited about that. I want to see that sort of front foot soccer. Whether we can translate it up to the highest level, I don't know. But we don't have to know until, the end of 2019 at the earliest. So I'm okay with experimenting with that a little bit now. We have plenty of time to course correct if we need to.
I want to ask about Ike Opara, because I believe this will be his first cap. Czech's roster, 0 caps. And he's been sort of, a favourite in Major League Soccer. He's 28? And I know it's essentially been injuries, right, is the reason that he sort of hasn't quite got that look. At 28, are we seeing this as kind of just a reward for a good few years, or are we seeing this as like, we wanted you here the whole time, finally we've got you, like you could be a part of this going forward? Yeah,
I mean, he'll only be 30 for the next Copa America, and I do think that there's going to be,
Did you say 34 for the next 30? No, 30 the number for the word
for the 30 during the next Copa America. So I think and I care about the Copa America. So and I think there will be.
I care about the CONCACAF League of Nations. I think there's all kinds of fun stuff to do between now and the World Cup. I actually slightly took exception. I really do. I admire the work you guys do on Extra Time Radio and Andrew Wiebe, but I took exception with the way that conversation was always phrased as, which of these guys will be around in 2022, as if the next 4.5 years of soccer don't matter.
Yeah, I think that we've we've probably dropped the ball on that as well. I think that in part it's kind of a reward for Ike, but in part it's kind of like, hey, there are games that it can't just be what's our ideal roster for Qatar. We got to get to Qatar first. We got to play good soccer over the next 4 years and get to Qatar first. And that's why, we're not done with Michael Bradley. We're not done with Josie Altidore. Yeah. A few other guys who, played roles we're probably done with, but those two guys in particular, and this is going to upset some people, but we're going to be seeing more of them, and we should see more of them because it's not clear at this point that there's anybody better than them at those two spots.
I think of that in terms of the same thing we talked about earlier about don't burn the whole house down, just like change some things. I think the idea of like throwing out Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore because of the World Cup failure, it seems crazy to me. You may as well their place can be at risk from up-and-comers, but you got to let the next generation win the spot from them, right? And in the meantime, those guys are there to be the competition or to hold the spot and probably to be the captain in Michael Bradley's case. So, we can improve the team, but we don't have to get rid of two of the best players on the team. That's not how you improve, right?
Right. And, and everybody, there's this weird cognitive dissonance in a certain subset of fans who are they're really eager for young players to sort of push through the ranks, but then they're resentful when those young players aren't able to push through the ranks and outplay the guys who are ahead of them. Now, which is not to say they're not. I think that Arena and Klinsmann both were way too slow to adjust to an aging player pool. I would have preferred to see Matt Miazga out there. I would have preferred to see bigger roles, for a number of other guys earlier. Like, could have used Brandon Vincent at left back. We could have done something other than Graham Zusi at right back. Yes, and so there is this native conservatism, whether it was Bruce or Jurgen, in picking the roster, and then that does need to change, but it doesn't need to change at the expense of common freaking sense. Like he said, Bradley and Altidore are, and Bobby Wood as well, and a bunch of really a whole, like Matt Beasler, it was the best player during the second half of the hexagonal. Like, we don't need to toss him out just because he's 30. We need to have common freaking sense. It's
not Logan's Run, right?
Right, yeah. I'm waiting for a good remake of that movie, so we'll see. But like we don't need to gather around the carousel and chant "renew, renew, renew" anytime somebody on the U.S. national team turns. It
kind of happens, though, right?
It does. So, but we gotta find that happy medium between being a little more aggressive in getting our young players into the national team and having common freaking sense. And I do think that starts with MLS teams and coaches being more aggressive and more willing to trust their young players and more comfortable coaching up young players.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
No, what's encouraging is that you see that from a guy like Greg Vanney, who keeps winning.
Yes.
And you see that from a guy like Jesse Marsh, who hasn't won MLS Cup yet, but won a Supporter Shield, won the East, got to U.S. Open Cup final, and has developed guys who have been sold to Chelsea for $5 million, and guys who are making the national team. And so, like, you're seeing good coaches in this league invest in youth, and coaches are copycats. If TFC keeps winning with it, and the Red Bulls keep doing good with it, you'll see that happen all over the league soon enough.
I want to quickly ask you about two guys that I know you've been sort of up on for a while, because I've heard you mention them, I've seen you write about them. Matt Polster and Brandon Vincent, right back and left back respectively, for the Chicago Fire. What do you like about those guys, and do you see them as possible starters for the US going forward, given that there's really a lack of depth at fullback on both sides, I would say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a tough time seeing Polster displacing DeAndre Yedlin at right back, even though Yedlin has struggled at times. I mean, he did not cover himself in glory at all in qualifying. But Yedlin is still the presumptive number one. But Polster's good. Polster, he pushes up with a sort of confidence and a willingness to go at teams. Like he sometimes you see players who the other team gives them space and they're a little confused at what to do with it. Polster does not have that problem.
Yeah.
He's as happy to get into the final third and combine as any fullback in the league. I think he had 6 assists in like 1,100 minutes. Like he was getting up there and making plays, and I love that. And I think in CONCACAF especially, that could be useful, especially so because he's a son of a bitch. He doesn't he doesn't go out there and play scared against anybody, which I love about him.
He kind of reminds me of peak Gary Neville.
Yeah,
if you watched much Man United in England during that time, like Neville, he didn't have any blazing pace, didn't really have any tricks or any skills, but he just combined with, David Beckham for a good length of time. I guess the US doesn't really have a David Beckham, but do you know what I mean? He was like always the combination guy, and then was always getting the defensive job done, and it just made him very steady and really useful in that sense.
Yeah, I think I didn't watch a ton of Manchester United back in the day. I don't remember Neville being an inventive passer. Polster has that a little bit.
Okay.
He'll do some stuff, like he'll hit some outside of the boot through balls and like play runners through and like a little bit more like he still thinks he's a number 10 at heart sometimes, which is endearing.
Because he started out as a midfielder, right? I remember him as a holding midfielder to begin
with. Yeah. So he's bounced around a little bit. As for Vincent, he's more of what we think of in a modern overlapping fullback, especially in I think a British sense, is that he's very linear. Mm-hmm. He gets up and down, the pitch, good motor, very good, not elite, but very good top end pace, and he hits a hell of a cross. If you look at his assists versus Polster's assists, Polster's come from when he dives inside and suddenly becomes an extra attacker. Vincent's he stays out wide and he whips that cross in, and he either puts it right into the spot for the forward to run into at the top of the box, or he puts it on somebody's head. And that would be a welcome addition for any team in CONCACAF. Would love to have a left back like that in the hopper. And I think he's got a big future, but I think the left back to pay attention to is Danilo Acosta, Danny Acosta, from RSL, who's just turned 20, and he's a unicorn. He's a unicorn. he's a left back who could break your lines of defense either off the dribble or with a through ball. He has a midfielder's vision from that spot, and like
that again
Polster,
because he was one, right?
Right, and like Polster, he's a son of a bitch. He we saw it when he chirped Clint Dempsey a little bit after RSL beat the Sounders.
Yeah, I remember
during the stretch run. Yeah, so he's not a kid who plays scared. He proved it at the U20 World Cup where he was one of our better players, and we all know that playing well at the U20 level tends to translate up to playing well at the senior national team level. So I'm very pleased to have both Brandon Vincent and Danny Acosta in the hopper at left back. And by the way, even though Jorge Villafana was brutally bad against Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think we should toss him in the trash either. So we suddenly have some depth in age 20 to 27 at left back, which is something the U.S. have never really had before.
But you're going to be disappointed when Justen Morrow starts against Bosnia, right? Because we have 3 left backs on this roster.
Yeah, I mean... the fact that Justen Morrow wasn't able to get into the picture at all from 2012 when he really broke out in MLS until the last 15 minutes is beyond frustrating. Especially
seems to always get January camp call up, and then the one Gold Cup, I think, right? The last Gold Cup, but never any big games, and I can't quite put my finger on why.
I can't either. At some point, I guess I'll probably write a book about the past decade.
About Justen Morrow.
Well, not about Justen Morrow, but of U.S. soccer, because it's been such a cluster F.
Wait, you're serious, right? You plan to do that? Because I would 100% buy that book.
Yeah, at some point,
or at least ask for a review copy from the publisher. But
right, there you go. Yeah, at some point, I'll probably have to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, like, the players themselves have told me about is, like, there needs to be a real examination of selection patterns under Klinsmann, and then under Bruce, and under whoever the next coach, whoever that happens to be. Hopefully it's a little more sensible and transparent and less inscrutable.
Are we doing okay for time? Because I've still got a couple more things I wanted to ask you about, but I know that you're...
let's keep going.
Keep rolling? Okay, so I'm looking at the midfield, and I see the name Tyler Adams, and that's a name that, always gets me excited, because he kind of represents the ideal of what this sort of homegrown player, development academy, playing in MLS to the US national team path should look like, right?
Yes.
And I also see Ian Harkes, Russell Knaus, Marky Delgado, less famous names and names that won't be as familiar. And I'm trying in my head to sort of put a starting 11 together even. I guess my first question would be, do you imagine this team to face Bosnia when it rolls out going in that same sort of, I want to call it like 4-1-4-1 shape that we saw against Portugal, that, put some pressure on the ball? Or do you imagine something different? And if it is the 4-1-4-1, who plays the Danny Williams defensive midfield role here?
That's a very good question. I think just from this list, it would probably either be Trapp or Knaus. Trapp, I've been critical of over the years because I just think his defensive instincts have been slow for a guy who really is only a number 6. Yeah, right. But he was really good the second half of the year for Columbus. Really good. And part of that might have been that he was playing more with Artur. But part of it was just he played well. So I would like to see Will Trapp get, another chance here. And Knaus is, he was the guy who was the captain on that 2015 US U20 team. It wasn't Kellen Acosta. It wasn't Matt Miazga or Cameron Carter Vickers or Zach Steffen. It was Knaus. And he was, signed by Hoffenheim. He played a little bit with them. Then he was a starter in the 2 Bundesliga with the VfL Bochum. And they wanted to keep him, but he decided he wanted to come home. And DC United made the right offer. And he's still a guy with, his upside is not Tyler Adams' upside, but his upside is considerable. So I think those two guys are the ones I would look for, but I do think it'll probably veer more towards a 4-2-3-1 than the 4-1-4-1. And I would hope to see either Trapp or Knaus as the 6 and Tyler Adams as the 8.
Oh, that makes
sense. Then you could maybe play Kellen Rowe as the number 10. And then you have...
He's kind of the only option, right?
He is, if we're going to play with a 10. Now, you could also do, okay, well, we're not going to play with a 10. We'll go back to the old, Bob Bradley had his primary creative players on the outside when it was Landon and Dempsey. So you could put, Rowe on one wing and we'll say Areola on the other, and then play with 2 forwards. Play with Sapong and Agudelo both up top and see if they can play off of each other. Do a little something like that. But it's a friendly, and who even knows how much the next coach will watch tape of what Dave Serra can do. The most important thing is that a bunch of new players get to taste a little bit of what it feels like to wear the colors in a full national team game. What do you make of Brooks Lennon? I remember watching him at the U20 World Cup and being quite excited about what he did. I kind of liked his crosses were Beckham-esque.
Yeah. Mentioning that earlier. They kind of had that high bending, hanging thing and then landing in the exact right place. And he seemed like he could go past people. So I was kind of excited about him, but I haven't paid as much attention as I should to how he did for Real Salt Lake this past year. He has a lot of potential. I think it's more as a wing back than a winger. He's a really energetic two-way player. As you said, his crossing is spectacular. He's maybe the best crosser in the national team pool at any age. And his pace, his commitment, his first touch is pretty good. He's not much of a dribbler. He needs space. And in the modern game, you don't get a ton of space in the final third. And he's not quite clever enough or quite clean enough on the ball to
create that space when the game gets really compact. Right. So I think as the years go on, you're going to see him steadily move back a little bit and be less of a winger or a forward and more of a midfielder or a wing back. And like honestly, it wouldn't shock me at all if he eventually became a fullback, a huge, like completely overlapping, pushing up every single time type of fullback. And he wouldn't be the first U.S. youth national team forward who makes that slow transition to the back. But I do think his future is is a little deeper than what we've seen from him in year one at RSL.
So if I'm following what you're saying correctly, it's like if space is tight, he hasn't got the moves to sort of open up some space and make enough space to cross. But if he's coming from right back, then he kind of overlaps into more open space, and he's got a chance then to get one of those great crosses in.
Exactly, and or to be the extra man in at the back post and nick a goal, which is what we saw from Justin Morrow would be a great example, right? He played left wing back in a 3-5-2, had 8 goals this past year. He didn't get that by being the point of the attack. He got that by being clever about when to add himself into the attack after guys like Altidore, Javinko, and Vasquez were holding the ball up and pulling the defense out of shape.
Right.
So I think
one game, right?
Right. Yeah, against the Red Bulls. Yeah. So I think that that is probably going to be Brooks Lennon's career path.
Very nice. Oh, speaking of Toronto, Marky Delgado is a player that every time I saw him play for Toronto, he seemed like the guy that was doing a lot of things to make things tick without getting any of the headlines or highlights. Yeah. Is that a good read on Delgado?
Yeah, for sure. He's a very understated player.
Yeah.
No frills at all. Does a lot of dirty work. Takes up a lot of support positions because Look, Bradley was great. He was the best defensive midfielder in the league last year by a mile, and it's a crime he wasn't voted best 11. But part of the reason he was that great was because Delgado was always there sort of shadowing him and letting Bradley take risks, which is exactly what Scott Caldwell did a few years ago for the Revolution when Jermaine Jones was there.
I see. Yeah, I feel like he's the guy that is always going to get like the 6 out of 10 rating in the newspaper or on the player ratings, and the description will be sort of didn't do anything wrong but didn't really have an impact. But if you go back and watch the game, he's kind of involved in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's actually the one thing he has that's a little bit of noticeable flair is his one-touch passing. And if both you and your listeners go find the highlights of the second leg of the Canadian Championship from this past year and watch the play leading to Javinko's first goal in the second leg. Marky Delgado hit one of the best passes of the year. Full stop. It was a spectacular one-touch pass, and he does that pretty constantly. But he's a player I like a lot. Same with Christian Roldan, who's in that same age group. The thing with both of these guys is they play quick and they take space quick, and they're very smart about that. They don't take enough time sometimes to draw the defense to them and then open up the field to play for everyone else. It's like they're almost a little bit too in love with taking one-touch passes. And so they have to balance their game a little bit better. And I think Kellen Acosta suffers sometimes from the same thing. He doesn't quite get on the ball enough, and he's another guy who's at that same age group. Ian Harkes, who I think is a lesser prospect just because his field coverage isn't as good.
I'm shocked he's in this roster, to be honest, because I saw him a bit for DC, and he wasn't bad, but I don't think he really had any bigger impact. Like, I'm much less surprised to see Knaus, for example, than Harkes.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's mostly fair. Ian Harkes wasn't great last year, but the talent is there. And I think one of the reasons to have him is that he's kind of the opposite of these guys. He doesn't always play one touch. He's a guy who really likes to draw the defense to him and combine in tight spaces and ping, 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 ping. Now, being at DC United is unfortunately maybe not the best fit for that kind of soccer. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the course of this camp. And again, I'm just glad that these guys are getting a look. And I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that I really do think they're all playing for the role of Weston McKennie's backup for the next decade.
Yeah, because
I think McKennie's he's a superb, special talent at that position.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to March where we can maybe combine all of this, hopefully with a new coach, and really see what the future looks like. What about the reason I want to ask you about Marlon Hairston is because I have to profess almost total ignorance of his skill set.
Mm-hmm. All that stuff I said about Brooks Lennon.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Applies to Marlon Hairston. I think he was more of an attacker in college. He's been used at right midfield and right back, and with the new coach coming into Colorado, who he's played almost exclusively a 3-5-2 with New Zealand and Bahrain. I would expect Hairston to get the bulk of his time as a right wing back in a 3-5-2 or a 5-3-2. Okay. And I think that's the perfect position for him because he doesn't have 360-degree vision, and he's not quite clever enough in the final third when the game is compact. But when the game is open and he can attack space, he can be devastating, and he has a good amount of skill to pick that last pass and a little bit of patience to draw those defenders to him and make a play. So I'm happy. Again, I'm happy to see him here. I'm not sure that if we play a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-4-2 that there's an ideal spot for him. But he's a guy who, yeah, absolutely, given where we are in the cycle, why not take a look?
So to the forward line, I think we know about Agudelo. I mean, kind of, right?
Right.
The story is we're waiting for it all to drop.
Yeah. I mean, he's been around for 8 years, and we still only kind of know. So, yeah.
But we know it's there. We know what could happen, right? So I guess we just keep waiting to see if it does happen. We know about Dom Dwyer. We know about Jordan Morris. To me, the big inclusion, and I'm sure Minnesota fans will agree, is finally Christian Ramirez. Is this too late, or is this the right time? Was it both?
I mean, it's both. Yeah. If he, his scoring at NASL translated up to MLS, he had a great first year in MLS. Mm-hmm. If that translates up to the international game as well, then I mean, arguably it's a better argument for looking at the entire system and how we identify and develop talent than the whole Jonathan Gonzalez thing is. Because in the end, you can look at the Jonathan Gonzalez thing and say, you know what, we identified him. We just screwed up at the end because we couldn't send a freaking text message. With Christian Ramirez, it's like, well, he's 6'2", runs like a deer, scores goals at every level, good first touch, wicked shot, has a nose for finding the ball in the box, plays unselfish soccer. Nobody identified him until he was 26. Then you have to find people and just punch them in the face. You have to punch people in the face for not getting that right. So I mean, honestly, I hope he does go out there and score a bunch of goals, because I have a suspicion that there are more Christian Ramirez's out there, and we have to find them. And it's framed primarily as a Black and Latino thing in U.S. soccer, in that we're not anywhere near as good as we should be at reaching urban or rural or ethnic communities. And certainly, if Christian Ramirez is successful, then that would be a data point in that favor.
Right.
But it's really just not really just, but it's in part larger picture. We are terrible at identifying and valuing our own attacking talent, no matter what background they come out of.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that if you take Christian Ramirez as a data point, he's not a player that kind of, to use the parlance of our time, slipped through the cracks in terms of was a talented soccer player who couldn't find a professional team to play for. It's a guy who was playing professional soccer and scoring goals, who we somehow managed to not notice.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, scoring goals at NASL level was I mean, it was not considered a major accomplishment until Christian Ramirez actually made that translate up to MLS.
Right.
And that, again, calcification of certain thought patterns at the MLS level. But also, he played at UCSB. He played at, like, this is not a kid who never got a chance. He played at one of the best talent-producing big-time colleges in college soccer. And I think he had one goal in about 25 games. And so whatever happened there and whatever happened in the interim, we have to figure that out. And we have to make sure that there are better and more diverse pathways for the Christian Ramirez's of the world, whether it's a Colombian American kid from Santa Ana or a black kid from San Jose or a white kid from Sacramento. We just have to be more efficient at identifying and nurturing and figuring out that there's got to be more than one path to get to the top.
So this is a big question, but how easy or hard is that to do, right? Because like, say the Jonathan Gonzalez thing we talked about in terms of communicating with him, you really could hire Herculez Gomez, maybe give him a small staff, and he can be the sort of liaison. But in terms of going out and finding players, you're talking about maybe a bigger scouting operation, right? Do you think that's possible with some sort of budget, or is that sort of a gigantic undertaking?
It's not. It shouldn't be U.S. soccer alone doing that.
Right.
One of the people in soccer who I most like speaking with is a friend of mine who used to work for Athletic Bilbao. He's a Basque guy. Okay. And you know the story of Athletic Bilbao. I don't know if all your listeners will. But
yeah, please go ahead.
The Athletic Bilbao is like Chivas on steroids. Chivas only takes Mexican players or Mexican-American players who have rejected the U.S., like Alex Zendejas, who was the FC Dallas kid. He had to say, I will never play for the U.S. In order to sign with Chivas. That gives them a player pool of like 120 million people, or population. A player pool, players that could take out a population of 120 million people. Mm-hmm. Athletic Bilbao only takes Basque players. Only Basque players. That is way smaller than the way Chivas Guadalajara limit themselves. And they're one of the only teams in the world to do that. And they have stayed in the top flight in Spain for decades. And they have made it all the way to, I think Champions League round of 16 about 10 years back. And they made it all the way to the Europa League final. They might have won one sometime in the last 20 years or so. They have been extremely successful with this extremely limiting approach or mandate for how they build their team. It is impossible to think of that happening in the U.S. But my buddy who worked for them says you do it by creating a nation within the nation. So the goal for U.S. soccer isn't to say we're going to blanket the United States of America. The goal is to say we are creating the United States of Southern California. Whatever the Galaxy and LAFC and the San Diego teams coming in, whatever they miss, we are going to blanket and we are going to get that as well. We have to create this fully functional state within the entire nation and then use and export that system to North Texas, to Houston, to Northern California, to Seattle, to North Jersey, to New England. And you build what Bilbao built.
Who's the we here? Is that you're saying that's a US soccer program? Or
well, I think it starts with MLS. It starts with MLS teams, and look, the Red Bulls and FC Dallas and RSL have the blueprint. If you look at what they've done in identifying and nurturing talent, they have the blueprint. And that, I mean, once MLS teams start doing that and realizing they can make money doing that, then it becomes U.S. soccer's job to enter and sort of just fill whatever gaps, examine it for best practices, and see if there's anything that needs changing. But you can't just make it be a top-down thing saying we're going to make sure we don't miss a single player, whether it's someone from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to Birmingham, Alabama, and all spots in between. It's just not logistically feasible.
Right.
What you have to do is make sure that MLS teams understand it's in their best interests to do this within the United States of San Jose, within the United States of Portland, within the United States of Salt Lake City. Because if you do that, there's enough talent and there's enough of a population in every metropolitan area in the United States and in Canada to create a robust academy.
All right, I like that plan. And again, maybe some of this happens post February 10th. You never know, right? There's maybe reason for at least there's a chance for optimism. I'll put it that way. Yeah,
there's a chance for it. But again, I think we have to understand that these are going to be incremental victories.
Yeah.
You're not gonna wake up one morning and then we got there.
It's new dawn.
Just not how it's going to work.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way to remind people to not be frustrated if the whole system hasn't changed by March 10th.
Yeah. Well, and one thing to hold off on, I would say I still don't want to see a full-time U.S. coach hired until after the World Cup, because there's going to be some serious coaching turnover all over the world after the World Cup, and there's no need to jump in and make a decision without all the options laid out and available on the table.
But we should at least get Dave Sarachan an international cell phone plan.
I think that would be a great idea. Like, teach him what WhatsApp is, maybe. There are ways to talk to people who are outside of the United States, and let him know that, yeah, man, you can find out a way to stream some games from the German second division.
Yeah,
that's possible. You can do that. You can watch stuff that's going down. I mean, Liga MX is all over the TV every week in America. But okay, if you don't want to watch those games, you get highlights. There are a lot of people who would do that for you. I promise.
There are websites, right? There are websites. One final guy I want to ask you about, because I don't fully know the story, is Rubio Rubin. So I understand he was with Stuybeck on what seemed to be a short-term contract to see out the end of the season. I understand their season is, it closes down in around November, right? But now I see him listed as unattached. So I don't know if you've been following this or not, but I'm assuming that means they just didn't renew his contract and now he's sort of unemployed. That's what unattached means, is unemployed, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's a forward, and he has 3 goals in 60 games.
There we go.
So, there were injury issues, of course, and but even before the injury issues, he wasn't putting the ball in the net. And if you're a forward and you don't put the ball in the net and then you get hurt, that's how you get unemployed.
But he was putting the ball in the net for Utrecht in the Eredivisie and for the US under-20s. So it seems weird to me that he went down a level and stopped scoring.
He scored 3 goals in 40 games for Utrecht.
Oh, did he? Did I just keep watching those highlights? Maybe that's the thing with Dave Sarachan. You've got to be like, okay, these are only highlights. There are other games where he didn't score.
Yeah, I'm looking it up now. He scored 3 goals in 41 games for Utrecht.
Oh wow!
And he was not a super productive player. And again, a big part of that is the injury, but not all of it is because of the injury. He just wasn't scoring much.
So what do we see happening for him in camp? It seems like maybe he's just there to do something. Maybe someone at US Soccer can try and connect him somewhere. I'm worried for him. I'm really worried because he's 21 or so. He's really at that point in your career where things can get bad.
Yeah, but the difference is between now and 10 years ago is if he's not good enough overseas, there are 23 MLS teams and a lot of roster spots, and maybe he has to take a pay cut, but he'll have a chance to win a roster spot, and if that doesn't happen, then there's still USL and hopefully NASL. So there's 40 other teams outside of MLS where you can make a living playing soccer. Not every youth player is going to work out. We've seen, and more often than not, they don't. And so the kid, he's still just 21 years old, so he's definitely closer to the start of his journey than the end of it. But it definitely seems like the ceiling has been lowered.
All right, Matt, you're probably not going to thank me for this, but I'm going to close with a tough question. Mm-hmm. If Rubio Rubin joins a Major League Soccer team as an unattached player who is a U.S. international, right? He has 4 caps. Mm-hmm. Can he just join a team as sort of a free agent? Does he have to go through the allocation order? Like, what's his entry process?
Right now, well, first of all, go to MLSsoccer.com/allocation.
Okay.
And you will see the allocation list, which I don't believe has been updated for 2018 yet. But he was on the 2017 allocation order list.
Does that mean the team has a claim on him, kind of?
No. That means that he goes through the allocation order. And right now, number one in the allocation order is FC Dallas, because they traded for that spot with the Walker Zimmerman deal to LAFC. So Rubio Rubin says, you know what, I want to sign with MLS. I would really like to play for my hometown team, the Portland Timbers. Dallas says, great, we're going to pick you and trade you to the Timbers for $500,000 worth of TAM. And the Timbers say, well, we're not paying $500,000 worth of TAM for Rubio Rubin. And then the kid's like, I guess I have to play for FC Dallas then. So that, it's one of the sort of arcane MLS and kind of restrictive MLS player rules, and there is some, as far as I know, there has been some discussion about maybe getting rid of the allocation order. It served its purpose back in the day. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it does so anymore.
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite things in terms of how players are treated in Major League Soccer, that you really should be free in an ideal world to just contract with the team you want to contract with, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
So, all right, anything? I feel like I've asked you a lot of questions. I really appreciate your time today. Is there anything like major about this January camp that I didn't ask you about that you sort of want to talk about or get out there?
I think something to keep an eye on is the lack of true creatives in the pool. As we touched on just a little bit, Kellen Rowe is really the only one in this group who you could look at and say, yeah, that guy can unlock a defense. Everybody else is really more rugged, dogged, two-way, like Areola, Lennon, Zardes. They're all those are the wingers. Those are all kind of the same players when you play them on the wing. And I mean, Agudelo and Sapong might be the most creative passers on the team, and they're both forward. So that's something to keep an eye on. And I was hoping we would see Jonathan Lewis from NYCFC in this one. Yeah, he didn't play much. I mean, he only got like 400 or 500 minutes, but he's one of the few wingers in the pool who you look at and you see him kind of unraveling the opposing defense with touch after touch and his vision. I wish he was there, and I'm disappointed he's not.
I'm actually looking at the roster again. There are so many central midfielders. I don't think it's just US Soccer trying to make up for the Jonathan Gonzalez thing by saying, look at all the midfielders. It suggests to me that we're going to see sort of a shape and a style that is sort of heavy on hard-working central midfielders, like at least 3 of them by the looks of things.
Yeah, and see, I would say you can accomplish that without ignoring the more creative types. And I feel like my only real problem with this roster is that we did kind of ignore those creative types. And I know that by normal standards, neither Lewis nor Andrew Carlton have really earned it at this point. And I would throw Jackson Ewell in there as well. I love Jackson Ewell.
Oh, he's a big miss, right? Because he's obviously too old for the youth national team summit.
No, he's not.
That's where Carlton is, right? He's not. Could he be there?
He can't be the U20s, but he could be the Olympic team. Okay. He was born in 97, so he's he's at that same age as like a Jonathan Lewis.
Oh no, I meant like in terms of this January. It seems like they've called up that youth national team summit.
Right. Oh,
mostly players who will be eligible for 2019 U20 World Cup. Right.
Right. Yes. Sorry about that. I misunderstood. But I would have liked to have seen Saracen branch out a little bit and be a little more aggressive in guys who can do a little bit more in terms of taking a defense apart with their passing. And one of the habitual shortcomings of U.S. soccer is we don't trust those guys. Mm-hmm. We don't trust those guys. We've had Benny Feilhaber, Lee Wynn, and Sasha Kleshtin for over a decade now. And, after 2011, none of those guys played any kind of role for the U.S. national team program. And that's been probably the most disappointing thing it's one of the most disappointing things of this decade of soccer.
That'll get a chapter in your book, right?
Yeah, it'll get many chapters. That might be the whole damn book.
Chapter 10? It should be chapter 10.
Yeah, there you go. Look, God, you got a future in marketing and branding, I think.
Matt, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. Always enjoy talking to you.
You too. The Last Jedi is awful.